Welcome, dear listener, to something quite new. It's called Podtime Stories, and it's made just for you. Chronicles dark and grotty, the littler ear may find it too nasty, but you've nothing to fear. These tales, they seep out of a most twisted mind. It belongs to Luke Aldridge, and I know that you'll find that they tickle the brain and the soul in equal measure. Look deep down here for your listening pleasure. So come with me, friends, and we'll share this account. Some may make you think just a smallish amount, but if you are worried that this tale could be true, I'm sure that it's nonsense. Quite sure. Now, are you? Welcome to Podtime Stories.
The subject of this story is one that some may find triggering. You may also want to have a listen before you play it to small ears. The Monster Returns, read by me, Luke Aldridge, with a soundtrack composed and performed by Dave Manington. Illustration by Sophie Smiles. Through half-closed eyes, he peeks at the clock on the bedside table. Nearly time. Knows he should be asleep. Knows he would be in deep trouble if ever he were caught. He doesn't care. 8, 7, 6. From downstairs a coat rustles, boots filled. 5, 4. Keys jangle, front door slams. 3, 2. Engine starts. Off it goes. 1. Should wait for 5 minutes just to make sure. But he can't. Silently he slides out of bed, slippers, blanket wrapped around his shoulders. Across the floor he goes. Steps over comics strewn about the place, over toys, football, school bag. The window looks out over the garden, fields, woods. And it's there his eyes fix. Trees, between trunks, between leaves. He's not sure how long he's been there. Doesn't matter. Doesn't care. Pinches himself every now and again to stop drifting off. Just as eyelids grow heavy, start to droop, he feels it. Doesn't have to see it. Sheer weight of footsteps, deep in the gloom, reverberate in his ribcage. Like a flat palm striking his chest, trying to push him down. Forgets to breathe for a moment. And then, with long, desperate intake, there it is. 5 times, 10 times, 100 times taller than the house, made of pure darkness, a cloak of mist wrapped around its shoulders. It halts. Older than time, its eyes appear, as if it has opened them never before. Just been born, just came to be. Sees the house, the window, the boy. Starts to move again, each step hits deeper, harder than the last, but he doesn't budge. Strides over the stone wall of the field, over the garden fence, until it towers over the house, so close that he can feel its warm breath on his skin, tussling his hair, granting life to loose drawings and colouring pages. If it wanted to, it could wipe the whole place from the face of the earth. Instead, it crouches, folds its body, shrinks until the pair are nose to nose. He and it. With it come smells, feelings, fragments. Pine, a cold, damp morning, a crisp autumn night. Bark, smoke. The snap of logs on a fire as the warmth caresses his face, being caught in the rain, dried by the sun. And there they stay, not a sound uttered, but a million things said. Old friends putting the world to rights, glimpses of shared memories, past lives. Parent and child, brother and sister, soulmates, more. After who knows how long, he offers his hand to his friend, moves in close. A Stroke of the face, pitch but warm to touch. Then it slowly stands, up and up and up until it almost touches the stars. One last shared look, a smile, and off it strides across garden and field, only stopping to glance back before disappearing into the woods from which it came. He smiles, gazes out for a few moments to where it returned. Reluctantly, he goes back to bed, feet dragging, desperately wishing for his friend to be there with him. And then, gravel crunches under tyres. Nearly time. Front door bursts open as ugly words enter uninvited. Footsteps stumble on the stairs, count them with irregular beat. Starts to feel them in his chest, along the hall. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, hand on the wall to steady, slap, slap. 3, 2, close enough, he can hear breathing, laboured, angry. 1, comes to a halt outside his door. The monster returns. The Monster Returns. Written and read by me, Luke Aldridge. Soundtrack composed and performed by Dave Manington, and the illustration was created by Sophie Smiles. Editing, sound production and general oral wizardry by Handsome Bob Field. The introduction was read by Neil Roberts, saxophone and clarinet was played by Toby James, guitar by Simon Coleman, keys by 80s Dave Oliver, bass by Andrew McKinney. The theme was written by me, I also played drums and stuff. The Podtime Stories logo was created by Martin Herity and the pod was written and produced by me. Podtime Stories is a Papa Bear Chronicles production. Text and recording copyright Luke Aldridge 2024. The right of Luke Aldridge to be identified as the author of this work has been asserted by him in accordance with the Copyright Designs and Patents Act 1988. All rights reserved. Hello lovely listener, how are you doing? Hope all's well. Thanks as always for joining us and sticking around for the DVD extras for The Monster Returns. A slightly darker, more sinister affair this week, and a subject that I realise may be tricky for some people, maybe triggering. I do hope that you feel like it's a subject that we've handled, or I'll take the blame for it, that I've handled sympathetically. If you do need to do so, you can Google the Samaritans and start there as a place to unload should you feel that the story has been a tricky one. I obviously hope that's not the case. I did run it by a couple of people who I know have, I'm sorry to say, experience with this sort of thing, and they were good enough to give it a thumbs up and say that they thought it was handled delicately. So with that in mind, I thought that I'd talk about the story first this week and then get on to the other fantastic people involved. So it was really the idea of this thing coming out of the woods, this big kind of, elemental creature sort of made of darkness that you thought was the original idea was that you kind of assumed that it was a baddie and that this little kid, that they were friends in some peculiar way and they had this connection. And it wasn't until I'd sort of played around with that a little bit and had written a bit and I already sort of had the title in mind, that really the destructive parental element sort of came about as being the bookend of the story, and also the obvious, obviously when you hear it, you'll realise that the title is not referring to the creature from the forest that the kid is friends with, but the parent in question. I didn't have either a mum or a dad in mind, so I've been unspecific about that. I didn't want to get into what happened afterwards. I didn't even think about that myself, or decide on, land on a kind of, once the story finishes, what actually happens. I simply wanted to plant the seed that there was something that this kid sort of needed a release from. The monster itself, is it real? Is it in the kid's head to deal with what's going on at home? I don't know. That's another one that I didn't really feel I needed to decide on. It's just, it's entirely up to you if it's something that you want to subscribe to, something you want to believe in. That's great. And if you think that it's maybe a coping mechanism, that's also fine. So the creature in question was inspired by a couple of different things. The Iron Giant, the film of the Ted Hughes story, is something that I didn't see until I was in my 40s and watched it as a dad. It had completely passed me by. I'm not entirely sure why, but I'd missed out on it. And when I saw it, probably about 5 years ago now, I was completely blown away. I thought it was wonderful, brilliant stuff. And I would recommend it to anyone with a big or small, this big metal robot that this kid befriends. And another film with a similar sort of vibe is A Monster Calls. It's the story of Connor, a 12-year-old boy who encounters an ancient tree monster who proceeds to help him cope with his mother's terminal illness and being bullied in school. It's got a great cast, and it's something that I saw and have fond memories of, but I'd really like to go back and revisit it. So Sigourney Weaver plays the grandma, Felicity Jones is the mum, Toby Kebbell plays the dad, and Liam Neeson voices this enormous tree monster that this kid sort of befriends. So those were two, and the third one is a film called I Kill Giants, which has a similar sort of idea that it's this little blonde lass who is a giant killer, and there's stuff going on at home, and it turns out that you're not entirely sure what's going on. It was a graphic novel, comic book first, and adapted into a film. I believe it's on Netflix. It's good fun. It's worth checking out. I can't remember for the life of me if it's okay for kids or if it's more of a grown-up thing. But all three of those films, The Iron Giant, A Monster Calls, and I Kill Giants, brilliant stuff. I would recommend all three if you haven't seen them. So the lovely people involved. When it came to soundtracking this story, I knew that I wanted an upright bass, a double bass, acoustic bass. And Dave sprung to mind immediately. He's a chap that I have played with for many, many years. We met with him playing electric bass guitar in bands probably about 20 years ago, something like that. And then we ended up playing in a different band, with Dave becoming a pretty regular bass player and me becoming the regular drummer. So I played with Dave an awful lot. Never really played much with him playing double bass, which is a shame. A gig or two, but he's such a lovely bass player, as you've already heard, double bass particularly. So a bit from Dave's website, links on our website, thepapabearchronicles.com, if you'd like to check out a bit more about Dave. But here's the general bump from his website. Bassist and composer Dave Manington is one of the mainstays of the London jazz scene. A founder member of the Loop Collective, he has played with many of the preeminent jazz musicians in the UK and Europe. He's also in demand for a broad range of different ensembles, playing with musicians from everywhere from South America to the Balkans. His debut quartet album Head Rush was released on Loop Records in 2008 to critical acclaim. He followed this up with the 2013 Riff Raff album release Hullabaloo, which was described as inventive, forward-looking jazz that subtly pushes the envelope whilst remaining thoroughly accessible to the listener. An even more ambitious Riff Raff album, Challenger Deep, came out in 2018 after an extensive Arts Council-funded UK tour. He is also a founder member of the much-respected E17 Jazz Collective. So as with all the musicians that have been involved in the podcast so far, the story's been recorded and sent off to them, and I have not really given any more direction than just letting them get on with it, really. Dave being no exception to that. It was lovely to get his soundtrack back. Very different from what I had initially thought, but loved it completely when I heard it. It was completely brilliant. I think it's a fantastic bit of work, and I hope that you think it, as I do, that it really elevates the story and adds a real mood to the piece. So thanks, Dave. It was great to have you on this, and I hope that our paths cross in the not too distant future. It's been a while. It'll be nice to see your lovely mush. And the art came from Sophie Smiles. Sophie is someone that I met kind of by accident in sort of autumn 2023 at the Lakes Comic Art Festival. We were both there on our own as punters. We weren't tabling, selling, anything like that. We were simply there to sort of go to talks and network a bit and do some shopping and all that sort of stuff. We got chatting in the cafe simply on our own and in between stuff, and we nattered for the rest of the weekend. It's a bit peculiar with Sophie. We're both primarily musicians, but we weren't there as musicians at all. She was there as an illustrator, and I was there as a writer. And as we nattered, we figured out that we had lots of mutual friends. We had basically the same sort of stomping ground as teenagers, playing in bands and stuff, but our paths never crossed back in the days. Sophie then joined me at Thought Bubble Comic Con, which was a month later, up in Harrogate, where I was tabling for the first time at that con. I'd been there before as a punter, but that was the first time that I was there selling books, and had literally an hour into the first day, the delayed print run of the book that I was taking, the new book that I was taking, arrived at my table. It should have been with me a week before, but there were all sorts of issues. Sophie was good enough to take on 3 pages of that story. I've mentioned it before, Blunt and Mag's Back to School, and Sophie hung out and sort of helped mind the table. She did some selling. She went and did bits and pieces, and we hung out in the evenings and stuff. So it was lovely to have Sophie around for that weekend. I haven't seen her since, I don't think, but we're talking about trying to meet up in the not too distant future. She's based in Devon, and with me in Buckinghamshire, it's we're not exactly round the corner from each other, I have to say, but it's always very lovely when I see her. We just natter endlessly about everything and nothing, really. So a bit from Sophie's website. I'm an artist and musician with a professional background in business and a portfolio of corporate, charity and independent creative projects. I've been helping people develop and communicate their ideas since my early 20s. That's when I founded a startup business to connect change leaders and help them collaborate. During this time, I trained at Learn Six Sigma, design thinking, systems thinking, leadership and communications. And what I loved the most was creative problem solving and coming up with new ways for people to learn from each other. I also trained and practiced with IDEO in creative leadership and design thinking methods. The design agency Scriberia hired me as head of creative collaboration, and there I designed many business interventions with visual thinking at their core. This inspired me to study a Bachelor of Arts in illustration and visual communications. I was awarded a first-class honours for my research into graphic autobiography and the animations I produced. I've been combining my facilitation and illustration skills with great success in the commercial world for nearly a decade. I work as a freelance graphic recorder, producing engaging visual summaries and facilitate groups to work visually themselves to envision new ideas and futures. My workshop designs draw on a wealth of techniques that enable different conversations and collaboration. I help teams build pictures together that bring real engagement, and the room buzzes with creativity and possibility. I love that work. That and playing bass and piano, I've performed, toured and recorded with various bands and artists, and have written and performed on all the soundtracks on my animations. I could talk about my other loves, Dr. John and New Orleans Funk, amphibians, narrowboats and the wild coastline of Devon, but that's for another time. Links to both Sophie's website and Dave's are at thepapabearchronicles.com. So thanks to Dave and Sophie for being a part of this week's story. It's always lovely to have other people collaborating and doing new stuff with something that I've written. Much love, as always, to Handsome Bob Field for general audio loveliness, tidying up, mixing, all that kind of stuff. You're a good man, Bob. Bless your cotton socks. So we're halfway through. This is story 5 of 10, and we're getting into the last half of our stories. Next week is a much bubblier affair that goes by the name of Boot. As always, if you've enjoyed the pod, it'd be great if you could review, like, subscribe, share, send us a carrier pigeon, all that sort of stuff. That would be lovely. Thanks to those who have already done so. To name a few, apologies if I miss you out. Bart Teeder, who's going to be soundtracking a story in a couple of weeks' time, always shows the love and shares our Instagram stuff. Simon Chilvers, who is the illustrator on next week's story. Thanks, Simon, for sharing stuff on the old Facebook. Handsome Bob, you always share stuff, so thank you, dude. George Lopez, who was the illustrator on Burgers. George is very good at sharing that sort of stuff. Tom and Jay from last week's story, The Flag. Thank you, chaps. Much appreciated. Hope you've enjoyed this week's story. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Sleep tight. Don't let the pod bugs bite.